you should get it because you invited yourself.
Okay, we're good. Okay, I wanna. I've been wanting to hear this talk for a while. I think the whole notion of the Sane stack is really amazing. A command line tool that integrates a production-ready API with an Ember front end, I think is really, really great. When I heard that Martin was actually looking at doing something like that, he started with something, and then we heard about Sane, and Martin jumped in. We were at one hack night. We started playing around with it, and then all of a sudden he's on the core team. So one of the core team members for the Sane stack is Martin, and he's here to talk about the Sane stack. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Martin, and I talked here last time, but briefly. So I'm going to talk now not what I do on a day job, but what I do open source for the last month or two. And first, I'll start with mentioning how it got to this point. So I also was using .NET, and I was using Backbone and a bunch of other stuff. But I wouldn't call myself like a classically trained, CS kind of guy. I went to 4-year school and all that. So I don't have that experience in particular. But I've been coding since I was 8, so I have experience in actual coding, not so much with very fancy algorithms and data objects and all the Java that some people think is the only real programming out there. So anyway, basically, yeah, I was doing .NET since 2002 because that's the only thing school taught me, because I went to school in Seattle around that time. And they're like, it's Microsoft, or Microsoft Town, so you learn Microsoft technology. They did not even give us PHP as an option or anything like that. So I took a web development degree, and there was no mention of PHP. It was all Microsoft 100%. JavaScript was mentioned for 3-4 classes. And Java was for 1 quarter. We did Java, and I'm pretty sure the teacher didn't know much about it. So I came out of school and I felt completely unprepared. It was like, what do I do now? So I took some more time and I had to teach myself. And I think that's a lot of people's story, actually. A lot of people end up realizing they have to teach themselves most of this work. It's not really so much something you can go and be told how to do it and then go do your job. It really isn't how it goes. So because of that, I've been training myself mostly. And when I was doing .NET, I was doing it for the city of Seattle, and the combination of the two was a huge drag. So it was .NET so uninspiring to me. It was like this monolithic thing and like a huge corporation doing it in an ivory tower, and you don't have good docs, you don't have a community, things doesn't make sense. Back then, there were things about .NET you had to generate through the UI. You simply couldn't do it through code. You'd be like, oh, let me delete this thing from the UI and then recreate it and maybe it will work. So that was infuriating. And a whole bunch of other stuff that just finally I was feeling like my career is sinking because of .NET. And so around 2010, I made a firm choice to just stop trying to learn more about it. I had learned the new stuff, the MVC and all that. And then at some point I was just sick of it. So I decided I had to make a change, and then you start wondering, well, I'm betting my career on whatever choice I make next, and what am I going to choose? So I had some interest in making dynamic interfaces at that time. So I was like, okay, I know right now Flash is gone at this point, and JavaScript is the next thing that people are using to make interfaces. So I started learning a lot of JavaScript, and in .NET you would just click buttons pretty much, and it would generate the JavaScript widgets for you. So it'd be like, oh, sweet, I just don't have to write JavaScript at all. And it makes the lame interfaces that were not dynamic, and you had to do postbacks and refreshes and all that. So at that point, I was like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. It's, apps were out there like Google Maps and Gmail. They were so much nicer. So I started wondering how to do that. So I got into JavaScript at that point, and I actually realized I like it. I had dreaded it until then because there was no debugger. It was just horrible for a long time. And then I started learning it more. And you can say what you want to say about jQuery, but that to me was the actual gateway into JavaScript because it made it fun and easy to do. Because you didn't have to write the code 3-4 times for every browser and all these things. And you actually could chain functions and do cool stuff. So I did some jQuery, and then I had to replace .NET with another server language. And I was like, oh God, what do I do now? And it's like 80% of the internet was PHP, but I don't think you want to have anything to do with that part of the internet. And then there was Java, which I don't get much of a creative vibe from Java, honestly. Many people would disagree. I think it gets lost between the 5 minutes compiling and 1.5 screen of errors you get. And so I decided not to do Java either. So then I was like, well, what did I do? Because then it was Ruby. But Ruby to me was kind of old news, because it was like, you had this language that almost took off and never did. And so, so you'd be like, and I know this is an Ember meetup, so a lot of people come from Ruby, but it really, beyond the really die-hard fanatics, Ruby didn't take off too much. And at this point, I was like, okay, there's also Node. And would you bet on like this old horse that kind of never made it, or would you bet on a young, new, promising horse? So I was like, okay, big. So huge gamble. I decided to do Node for a living, or just full stack JavaScript. Everybody thought I was crazy, obviously. That's like 2010, 11 when I was learning about all this stuff. Actually, no, 2010, not yet. Maybe 11, 12, I was starting to learn Node. And by end of 2012, I was never touched .NET again. Probably the best thing I ever did. And from then on, my career went really much better. And it was much more creativity. I was in the open source community. It was so much more energizing. I do realize a lot of the innovation and the good stuff in JavaScript actually does come from Ruby. So don't think I'm bashing Ruby. I really respect what Ruby people did. Python, I have not tried it. I've done like 3 tutorials. That's about it. And Ruby, I have not written a single line, so I can't say much, honestly. Anyway, so I decided to write Node, and so I'm going to talk about full stack JavaScript. And the biggest reason I decided to write Node of all things is that when you think about it, you know, you have all the real developers like Java people and so on that would say, oh, JavaScript is a toy language, it's just junk, it doesn't do right things. But then you're like, okay, make me an interface, and they can't. So to me, it doesn't matter how fancy the languages and the algorithms and the data types are, you know, top notch. To me, it's about how useful it is, how many things I can make, right? So JavaScript is the only thing that you can do, and you can write your server, your client, and you can deploy your interface a bunch of places. Now, there are obviously limitations. Like if you do Cordova, you end up losing performance and a bunch of other stuff. But you get more out of one language than any other language, is what I think, at least. So that was, to me, it's like utilitarian approach to my choice. And because of that, I'm totally into full stack JavaScript. I think I've been doing that for a living about 3 years now. I haven't had to write any other language, pretty much. And it is a huge liberation, I think, to not have to worry about it. So my typical workday as a .NET developer, it would be like this. I model my data in SQL, and then, okay, I have SQL tables, I've done all the joins, then I write a store procedure, I have all the parameters, then I write my .NET, you know, whatever you're writing, VB or C#. Then I have to translate from that to the store procedure. Store procedure has to go to the tables. Then I go to the client, I have to take all that again, and I turn it into JavaScript. Then I have to spit it out in HTML. So I'm really doing chores all day, if you think about it. You're not doing a creative process. You know what you're going to do creatively from the get-go, but then you have to do 5 steps of just chores and translating languages, which to me was completely less than ideal. So at this point, I didn't want to do that anymore. And what I want to show you today, the Sane stack, there is none of that at all. You write one language, you never translate data, and if you're using either Mongo or a good ORM, it just gets saved into the DB. So you don't have to worry about basically manual labor, because I don't think any of us are programmers to do manual labor. So I don't know why you would sit down and have to translate the same data 3 times. Yes? I've heard bad things about it. Personally, no, I don't work on sales. But people have started using different ORMs or I don't know, they're trying to push hard for fixes. I personally use Mongo, and the biggest reason is that I work on my day job, I work with the server team. At home, I do full stack, but I do rapid prototyping. I have not put anything in production with that stack. So because of that, I'd much rather use Mongo than have to do SQL and all the other stuff too. Yeah, so I haven't actually tried with Postgres. One person on our team is saying that it completely doesn't work for him, but he's pretty demanding. Yeah.
So for Postgres and MySQL support, I already showed you yeah, you can use Synchronize. I've been using Synchronize on the side project for like a year and a half. It used to be pretty bad. 2.0 came out recently and they really fixed it. Do you use it? I'm using it with Express, and Sane is on Express. I'm pretty sure it's all good. They have really good support. Yeah. Synchronize was bad like a year ago, and now it's really a good ORM for Node. In general, like if you want to do ORM with Node, MySQL, Maya, DB, Postgres, or etc., you can use Synchronize. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend Postgres. Sure, I'm a big fan of Postgres.
I do.
All right, let's keep going. So yeah, that's some of my rationale. So another big reason I use JavaScript is that besides using just one language, able to tap into a huge base of other people's code. And NPM is now about 125,000 modules, which is just a completely invaluable resource. I don't know if you can match that. Maybe Ruby guys have more gems, I don't know. But this is, to me, huge. I want to be able to say, hey, give me this and give me that, and I have an easy API to use it. That is mostly the case in the Node world. So yeah, because of that, I chose full stack JavaScript. And the third thing that makes me choose the stack I'm choosing is that the architecture of it. And I just came from Node Summit, and there was a lot of talk about architecture there. And they actually do not like what we do with Ember and what is done with Rails, which is the convention over configuration. And they are, they scorn that kind of stuff because it's monolithic, and then you start building up this kind of monster, which is has to work in a certain way or it falls apart, right? And then the problems start where, what was the previous talk Paul was talking about, we have the conventions, then the framework insists on conventions, then you try to go around them, and then you're spending your time really not doing productive things. So what they were talking about Node Summit was entirely what they call the Unix philosophy, where every program has one function and everything is made of a network of these programs, and you hire enough people to do it, from scratch pretty much. And the whole thing about that is Node Summit was pretty much 100% corporate.
So you don't believe that Unix has conventions?
Yes, I'm sure it has.
I mean, when you go to Ubuntu, you may be able to change directories and stuff, but you do get in trouble if you don't follow the directory convention or to follow documentation. It absolutely has conventions. Another thing too about the NPM module is that I've noticed a tendency for so with Ruby gems, it tended to be like the package that would become the dominant one, and everybody would kind of coalesce around that. And NPM modules, it tends to be like many of them that do the thing. And the most popular one 3 months ago may not be the most popular one this month. There's no guarantee that if you invest in that one, that it'll be popular in 3 months from now.
Yeah, that is fully so.
The turn and the I don't know. There's some.
Also, every company that got up on stage at Node Summit also talked about making a framework for each of their own companies. So all my
That's what I was getting at. Right.
Has their own conventions.
Right. So
You
that
need
that
to
was
go into somebody's house and know what their stuff is without learning all their
Absolutely.
critical knowledge.
It's every big joke.
right. So those are all valid points. But where I was going with this is that all these companies that say that, forget about the other systems, make your own and make your own 50 little modules, put all that together. These people have hundreds of developers, these companies. So they can afford doing that. But when you're like a sole developer or a small team or something, that's the only environment I've ever worked in. I think that is actually a detriment. So they were all into Happy.js over there. And they're all saying, okay, there is no convention. Here's 50 modules. Put them together yourself. And to me, that is a huge endeavor, right? You can't quite do that. So I personally choose to go with the convention that comes from Rails pretty much because I do Ember and sales. So that's my choice for architecture because of that exact issue. When I got into Ember, I had done Backbone for about a year before, and I did some Angular, and I didn't like too much about it. So then I learned Ember, and I'm not going to lie, at first I really did hate Ember data. It was completely unusable. And that was December 2013. I think in January 2014 it was fixed though, and it got stable, and I have not had a problem with that since then. So I actually think Ember data is pretty brilliant for what it does for you. I don't think there's a tool like it out there that will make a database in your browser and it will match up relationships, cache, and all that stuff is pretty phenomenal, actually. And I haven't really had a problem for a long time with it. And so after doing Backbone, that app was a whole bunch of maintenance and boilerplate. You had to do your own teardown, your own everything. You had to avoid all the double bindings, and the renderings were tough and all that stuff. So then I looked at Ember, I was like, wow, all these problems are actually solved for me there. And that to me was the big draw. Ember core developers solve problems in a quite sophisticated way. They know what they're doing. I'm not going to do it any better than them. So I would rather use their convention over trying to spend years and make my own. So because of that, I chose to do that style. And when I did that, I saw Tom Dale talk about this concept. It's like a psychology concept of making too many choices basically exhausts your psychological bandwidth. And that really rings a bell. How many times have you had a creative impulse and you're like, oh, I'm going to make an app about this. And you're like, it's a great idea, I know it's going to work. And then you sit down and you're like, oh man, I got to make a whole software stack before I can even make my app. And then you have to solve all these million of problems before you actually do the creative part that you wanted to. And so your impulse is gone before any time passes almost. So that really resonated when I read that statement that you have a limited bandwidth for decisions. No matter how good you are, you use up that bandwidth. So to me, it makes perfect sense if you're in a small team or a sole developer, use convention over configuration. So at first, I actually picked up what was called the mean stack. How many of you guys do a full stack JavaScript development? Not too many, huh? So at first, when the mean stack came out, it was Angular and it was Express, and Mongoose was an ORM for Mongo, and then it was Mongo as a database. So then I was like, I used that for a while. I took the whole thing apart, and then I was like, well, I don't like the Angular part. I took that out, and then I made this boilerplate here, which was basically the mean stack, but it was with Ember instead. And I think this was, for a while, the most robust full stack JavaScript demo for Ember. So it got like 300 something stars and 50 forks, whatever. And then like a month or two after I made it, Ember CLI came out, and then this thing got outdated immediately. So I was like, oh, great. So I didn't want to go through what Dave was showing us because there was no converter at that time. So I would have to do the whole chore of switching my app. And then I also realized that when I'm making my server with the mean stack without convention on the back, I end up copy-pasting like crazy. So this would be a standard, actually that's not a very good example. If you look at the controller here with the mean stack, you have, here's my article and, sure. So here's the controller for a mean stack, and you have to completely repetitively, copy-paste your CRUD methods. You're like, okay, CRUD, blah, blah, update. And that was back then. I don't know what they've done since then. But so I would keep on copy-pasting these things, and then I'm like, wow, this is nonsense, because Ember abstracts all that, and then you put it in a module within the framework, and then you just say, find me this one, or update me that, save, whatever. That thing doesn't have to be this way. And I was like, well, why do I keep doing this? And then I look around, and it turns out Sales.js actually does use almost the same conventions as Ember, but it uses them on the server. So I was like, maybe I should take this framework for the server, and I should put it in my other app, which was MinStack with Ember. At that point, it's not MinStack anymore. It's like Ember and Sales, right? So before I started doing that, I actually Googled it, and it turns out somebody had made it a week before that. So I was like, oh, great. So I actually did not write the Sane stack. It was written by somebody from Austria who lives in London right now. And so he should get all the praise. Let's see here. This guy wrote pretty much the entire thing, the stack itself. And he released it around August or September. And I think I found it very, very quickly, and I started getting involved with it. So that's another thing about open source. There's so much room for people to get involved. It doesn't mean that you have to be the maker of something or the original creator, because there's so much work to be done. There's so many needs within open source. You can immediately go and fill a need. And then if you add value, you may get inside the team and start making like a sophisticated project. So if you guys are interested, I think no thing is better right now for some developer's career than actually joining an open source team. And there are many, many arguments for that. But yeah, that's how. So I started talking to the creator and QAing for him, testing, prototyping with his product. So I would report everything to him that I'm encountering. He would fix bugs, release, things like that. And then it got some traction, and he invited me and another person to join a team with him to continue making it. So at this point, we have a team, and we have a pretty active community over here on Gitter, where we discuss all these things. So if you are interested in this, join this channel, because a lot of goes on, a lot of talk happens here. And basically, since we joined the chat, I think it's been a month or two, there are over 5,000 something messages and 80 members or something like that. So it's gotten really active. Some channels you go and you ask a question, and 4 days later somebody answers, or if you're lucky. This one is really active, actually. So yeah, join the chat. And so without any more introduction, here's what this can do. So yeah, it's Ember and Sales. So, oh, this is really small. Okay, so it's Ember and Sales, and it now has a CLI. Wow, where's my? And now has a CLI, so you are able to. Can you guys see the terminal at all? I don't know if it's bumping up the size too much. Anyway, it looks decent. So it has a CLI, and the thing is, both Ember and Sales are based on convention, right? So that means you can easily make generators, and both. What is that? Oh, right. Okay. So since it's convention-based, both frameworks, the server and the client, have generators, because it has a folder structure. That way, you can easily generate things for both the server and the client in the same time. And they're both really the same generators, as far as I understand, from Rails, or at least they're based on them. So using that stuff, you can have a CLI like this one, which just tells the other two CLIs from Sales and from Ember, make me this or make me that. So you can very easily say, this, and then you're able to pass flags to the command. So you can say, I want this to have a database, which I want to be Mongo, and I want verbose outputs, for example, right now. So this may or may not work, because the internet here is a bit fickle and NPM may not deliver, but we'll see. So what it's doing now is resolving dependencies and doing all kinds of stuff. Installing right now Ember CLI on the front end. And if it moves on, it will install Sales as well. Or it may hang. I don't know. It depends on what the NPM decides to do right now. In this public kind of Wi-Fi, I'm not too sure. But if it does get done, it will look like, let's see here. I think it is, yeah, so it is proceed. And it's continuing doing its builds and stuff like that. What it's going to give me now is the version without Docker, which means it will run on my OS. And you have also the option of using Docker. And I don't know, how many of you guys are familiar with Docker? About half. So Docker is really popular right now. Every single company at Node Summit suggested using it. And that goes with their whole philosophy of microservices and breaking everything into different modules. Docker makes running that and deploying it across environments much more easy. And it does that by maintaining like a central VM, and then it is able to make new environments for every single little project you have without having to reproduce the entire OS. Somehow, I don't know how it does that, but it is able to do that very, very well. So every of these big companies is like, yeah, if you have, you know, PayPal said they have 40 Node applications. And you imagine deploying all that without some kind of tool which allows you to package things up and move them along environments. So that's what Docker is used for. And you are able to pass a Docker flag, which right now would be too much to demo, but you could say, you know, the same thing, but you could say, you know, Docker. And in that case, the same install will actually go on a virtual machine. And then everything is packaged up. The database you choose will be installed inside the virtual machine. So at that point, it doesn't matter if I have Mongo or not on this machine. It will be inside the VM. So you can use anything you want. You can be like, oh, make me this environment, click, and it will, which is pretty amazing. And I think pretty much everything is going to start being done that way at this point. So anyway, now we just made the new project, and what that looks like is and so here's the new project it made. It made a client folder and a server folder, as well as this one is basically the config file that tells it's a state manager for the project, the Sane CLI file. And then the fifth thing is the if you are to use Docker, that will be your config for your environment inside the VM. And if you go into the client, this is pretty much Ember CLI out of the box. We do very little config to this. And then there's server, which is basically a sales app, and it's generated by the sales generator. But this one is actually a little bit different than what you would get out of the box with sales. If you remember what Paul was saying earlier, it's because adapting things to Ember is much easier than adapting Ember to the server. So because of that, we're using a module. So we're using a module which does the adaptation automatically. It's called sales generate, this one. So this was written by another person, and this thing, it adds a command or it's just a library. It's basically a bunch of templates for sales which allow the CRUD to adapt to Ember's style of data. And that really saves you a whole lot of time if you've tried to do this yourself. So what was brought up earlier, the JSON API, this is basically a spec trying to standardize API, because every single time you try to make an app, you will run into this problem. You're like, what should my server data look like? What should my clients expect? What is my framework expecting? What are the glitches that will appear when I'm working with it? So all that is a huge problem which these people are trying to solve. And one of the people that's on this project is Yehuda Katz from Ember core team. So the same person trying to standardize JSON API or just APIs and clients all together is also making Ember. But truly, Ember data is not yet up to spec with this thing. The idea is that it will be, but it has not caught up completely. So if you read the spec, and if you design your API to do this, Ember data will not work with it as far as I know. I might be wrong, but I don't think Ember data has the links and all this kind of stuff yet. Anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but also I just read that there's a rewrite pending for this spec, which also doesn't exist yet. So Ember data will be changing to the new rewrite of the spec, which they brought up a week ago or so. So yeah, things are still in flux, and I totally understand what the complaint was for, when you make a long-term app and the spec keeps changing on you, that is really tough to deal with, and you have to keep on rewriting. So it's really, to me, it's to the point that we need to standardize this. So there has to be less flux. But unless we have a standard, that's not going to happen. So at least Ember Data is trying to adhere to a standard because, I don't know, when I was doing this with Angular, there was no standard at all. Same with Backbone, you would just throw whatever you want out there. And then it becomes really hard. Here at Classmates, we have an API. I mean, there's no expectation what you're going to get out of that thing. And it's really tough. So it does everybody a huge favor if we do standardize APIs. And that's why, to me, Ember and Ember Data are really, really important projects when it comes to this, and so is this thing. So hopefully we can put the entire stack on this spec when it is complete, because they're going to rewrite it again. If you go to GitHub right here, they're talking about a pull request, and somewhere around here, they're talking about rewriting the spec again. So honestly, whatever you write is going to be written in 3 months, because yes, it is JavaScript. So anyway, that's why we have to adapt sales to Ember, because Ember is strict about its standards. And I believe that's for a good reason. And so what that looks like is that once you have resources, and you can create resources using Sane like this, so you can say generate resource for, ball, for example, and it should have a color, which is a string, and a size, which is a string, or maybe number. And what that did just now is it went and it created a sales controller and a sales model, and it just created everything Ember would need for that resource. So at this point, you actually just generated a resource in your API and your client, which can do a total handshake. And so far, I've done basically 2 commands, right? So with 2 commands, if I am to run this app now, and I can do that with Sane up, it should be able to allow us to hit that now. So now, this is kind of matching the outputs, which I personally don't like too much. So when I actually work with this, I split them in different tabs, and I have client and server running separately. But if you do want to do that, it does both for you. So now you have both the server and the client running together. And the proxying is handling for you right here as well. So they will talk to each other. So when you are to hit Ember at localhost 4,200, it will now be Ember. But if you, let's see. Now remember we made, man, my screen has shrunk because of the casting. If you remember, we just made a resource which was called ball. So in the model here, we can do oh, I did. There. And there is a template. So here's the bow template at this point. And if you see here, a request went out because of the model hook. And it did return nothing since we have nothing. But at this point, you do know that we actually have an API and we have a client, and we can start building UI immediately, which happened through 2 commands so far, which is pretty, I think, impressive if you have done this the manual way. And the idea here is not that you adopt this stack and you never have to learn how to do this without these generators. The idea is that, after you have learned what it does, you don't have to do it manually 50, 100, 500 more times. You can simply run your command and do what is actually interesting to you, which I think is the idea behind Ember and behind Sales as well. And I guess that is based on Rails. So, I probably would have liked Rails a lot if I ever got into it. But so now we have an API and we have a UI for it. It's not much of an UI, but yeah. Server-side controller, sure. And the models, okay. Somehow my resolution went really bad when I connected this, so it's hard for me to see, so bear with me, but. So here's the ball controller, and it's completely empty. Pedro, here's the ball controller.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Right, so I actually do have properties in this one. And here are the properties I set through the CLI. And you see these are sales syntax properties. And at the same time, if I go to, let's see, models, and this is Ember, and here's an Ember model. So the generator was smart enough to pick up whatever was passed in the CLI as an input, and it would create client and a server model simultaneously. So you don't have to do this, because otherwise you have to do manually all this. In Ember is DS attribute, and it's a number. In sales, it's a whatever, and it's a float. The resting points in a sales application live in the blueprint folder. You know, the assumption is that pretty much every time you're going to have a CRUD, right? So you have everything right here, which is automatically inherited by every resource on your server. Yeah.
I want to add a property. I want to add a property so it's added on both sides.
We don't have that in the generator, I believe, so far. It better be. If not, we can add it. We accept suggestions. So you can easily go to GitHub, open a ticket for a suggestion, anything you want. We are pretty attentive to things like that. Yeah.
So otherwise you just go to the model and you add your property.
Yeah. Right. So you would have to do both sides if you do it manually. Hopefully we can make a generator which adds on to code as well. Right now we kind of blow out or create from scratch. We haven't done diffing and insertions, you know, any kind of fancy stuff like that. But so far so good, you know, we managed to create this from scratch, and you know, now we have an API and a client to work with. The API is Ember style, as you can see, because it prefixes whatever came from the server is prefixed by the name of the resource, and it's pluralized because we're looking for an index. Yeah.
Does sales handle the models with Mongoose, or is it built in?
It has its own ORM called Waterline. I found it pretty good for Mongo, and I've heard a lot of complaints about Postgres.
It's called Waterline?
Yeah. Right. So Waterline for Mongo is pretty good. And if you're rapidly prototyping and not worrying too much about production, you can probably get away with just using that. If you're going to do transactions, money, and you know, very sensitive stuff, you may want to think twice about doing that. Yeah, cool thing about Waterline though, the ORM in sales, is that you can have a whole bunch of data sources. So you can say, this stuff lives in Mongo because Mongo can do automatic geoqueries. And that lives in Postgres because Postgres can do transactions and so on. And that lives in Redis because I want it fast. And then something lives on a third-party API, you can make another model. You can tell your models which data source to pull from, and your ORM is going to normalize everything for you. So it acts kind of like Ember data does. And it says, okay, put all the data together by ID, make the relationships in memory on the server layer, and then it doesn't matter where they came from, which is also very, very convenient. That's a strong feature, I think, of sales.
Is that what it says, Waterline?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, now if I wanted to, now the sales server itself is running over here, and this is the backend actually, and it will tell you, yeah, you have to prefix for the actual API. So this address is what serves the static data normally, and if you go to the API itself, it's API, and it will be right here. And then if you wanted to create a resource, you could do create, and then you can pass, blanking out a bit here, create, and you can say, I think I'm getting this wrong. Okay, so I just created a new resource, and you can see it was given an ID from Mongo. I'm sorry?
Is that like net request?
Yeah, I used the GET request, but I hit the create method of the controller.
The size need to be
Yeah, size got dropped for some reason.
does that need to be braces too?
Yeah, you're right. So and here's a good point for the, so it has to be, and the reason that happened here, if you saw the size parameter dropped, right? And that is because I'm actually having to pass it Ember style by wrapping it in the name of the object which I'm creating. So I'm creating a bow resource. That means that I should be calling my JSON that same resource name and wrap my whole data in that, just like Ember wants it. Otherwise, the server is adapted to Ember, it will just simply drop that like it doesn't exist. And yeah, that's the adapting which the stack does for you automatically, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's pretty important to understand that it's doing that, because otherwise you wonder, like, oh, where did my parameter just go? It's gone. But that's that. And if you are to look in the database, this made it all the way to my database. And here in this database, we now have these two resources which I just created. So it made it all the way to the database. So far, we have 2 commands and 1 line inside of Ember.
Does that work without Mongo? Like, is there a file system, file?
Yeah, originally, if you don't pass the T flag, which I did, which made me a database connection, it will save to the, either memory or the disk. I think sales disk. Yeah, yeah. So it kind of makes a disk version of a Mongo pattern, and it starts saving on the disk. Yeah.
Does it support pouch?
Pouch, I don't think so yet. There may be. So if you wonder whether it's supported, it would be on the sales side because it's server, right? So you would think, is there such a thing as sales? Or you said couch or pouch? Okay. So.
Instead of create that.
Oh, patch.
Like an update.
Oh, so this patch is the name of the DB?
Patch is a method.
Message to that.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. No, no, sir.
It is supported.
What is it?
Cool. I know, but Reels it's built on Express, so
Right.
you thought about that a little bit, because it's really just
Right.
potentially that is, if you don't want to really make get requests to those resources.
Right. So I got a bit lost throughout your question. You're saying, is it production ready or? Oh, right. So, oh, right, right. So, yeah. So, of course, what comes out of the box is completely insecure, and it has no protection for almost anything. So it's up to the developer to start saying, okay, this should be protected. You know, sales has a policy convention, which I'm going to get into right now. But you're right. You know, that's completely unacceptable to put something out in production where everybody can make things happen with the request. So because of that, as soon as I got involved in this, I was pushing pretty hard to have authentication. And you know, what we can do now actually is that I can say Sane install Sane out, and this thing should make me an authentication. And it also is questionable. So now it's asking me if it can rewrite a bunch of stuff. So you can actually see how it's going to do that. It has to add on to my router a bit. It talks about cores. We have to allow cores if we want to authenticate, because the client and the server are not on the same domain, right? Because it's a distributed app. It's a single page server, different domains. So it has to have cores. And then the policies where you protect it, you know, you can do a per method or per request or per resource kind of policies. So you can say, okay, these 3 resources open for everything, or those 2 resources, they're write and they're delete, they're close to, you know, everybody but the owner and an admin and so on. So all that is configurable. So now we've answered a bunch of questions here, and it's generating some more stuff, which basically, if you guys have worked with Ember simple auth, that is what it's on the client. And on the server, we wrote something custom, which is not entirely finished, but it is so far for this demo sake working, but I would call it canary. It's not even alpha yet. But, and if it does move on, because right now it's pulling something, I can show you what happens here with that same project. At this point, if I was to, yeah, this is still running. This is a project I did this with earlier. Or is it? Maybe not. So hopefully things will move on, but it will not. Okay, so I can do it with this project, I believe. So this is a project which I previously installed this, and this is actually running inside of Docker, which is pretty interesting. If you see here, there's more going on. The GB is logging as well. And now it's running inside a Docker container. And if I am to hit that thing, at this point, it actually has a very 93 looking logging. And there is a route here, which is for the user, which we can, let's see here. So here's the Ember router, and we have a user route, if you can see here. And that route is actually protected by Ember simple auth. And we can check that here. So you see here, I'm extending the authenticated mixin right here. So that is a route you cannot hit normally if you are not logged in. So that's why we're going to see basically a redirect to login right now if I do that. You see, I stay at login, but if I was to log in here, I don't remember my password. Maybe my something is broken here. Socket hanged up. Yeah, I'm having some kind of connectivity issue. Yeah, I may have to restart Docker. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know if people that have used Docker have done that on OS X, but I've had a lot of unstable experience with Docker. Like my containers get stuck, and then I get these unpredictable behaviors. And I'm trying to find a way to fix that. Other people say they have really good experience, but I haven't. So I really wonder how to do that. So let's see. Yeah. I lost track. I think I'm on Alpha 4, which is not really out. Basically, because I have to keep testing. The Sane install is on Alpha 4 or 3, which if you do install at alpha, you can get it. Yeah. So let's see if I can log in here. Yeah, I have crashes. Blah, blah, blah. So for some reason it's being unstable right now. Let's see. I think I have to restart Docker or something. Let's see if this project installed at all. Ah, another one is running. There. Yeah. Sorry about this. Everything is extremely rough. I'm basically pulling from the latest versions, and it's unstable. But there's no other way if you're actually making it right now. So this may have worked, so let's try this one. Try to make a new user. Here we go. It actually. So it was actually, so we're what, 3 commands in now. We've got authentication, and we can prove that by going to that user route. And that route is now open, and you are seeing data come in. If I was to try to make the same request, and you can see here, authorization header is present with bearer token, which is encrypted, which is JSON web token style authentication. And if I was to make the same request for the users without passing that header, so if I did it straight from the browser and I went to the sales, it will tell me credentials required. So the API is pretty much secure at this point. It isn't to the point where it has authorization, so I can actually delegate roles yet, but it does authenticate. So user has to be logged in now to touch any resource which you tell it to. Yeah, and it's both on the client, so I can borrow the client. If there's no local storage session, the client will simply not render that route as well. But you can probably fake that if you're a developer and you get into DevTools. But your API will still tell you this if you have a fake token or something like that. So yeah, 3 commands. We have a secure API. We can make resources per command. Not too bad. And let's see, what else do we look at?
Policies.js or the one that just showed. I'm just curious if you can see it real quick.
Yeah, sure. So the policies are over here. And this policy in particular, so there's 2 things about the policies. There's a config, which tells, and this is really a lot of similar conventions to Ember, but let's see where that is. Yeah, policies, this is what was generated here. So we have everything has to go through the has token policy, which means it gets screened for a token being present in the request header. And the only 2 open ones are the creation of a user and the authentication controller. So that much secures everything but registration and login.
Does that work like middleware then?
Yeah, that is a middleware. Yeah, so the policy itself, so here is the name of the policies right here, and that maps to the policies folder in the API. And then you look at that, and that's what this is. It's a middleware for Express, which basically fires up Express JWT. It passes the secret from the config, and if it is actually valid, then it proceeds to the next chain in the middleware, which is the actual controller for that resource. Any questions here? Another thing, let's see what else we can talk about. Another cool thing about sales, I think, is that, and the way it clicks with Ember, I will go now to another app I've been making. So while the main creator of the stack has been making the stack and the CLI and everything, I've been making a demo app which explains how to use it. So then you can come here and you can see all these features. You can see the CRUD. The authentication I just showed you was actually prototyped in this app, and it was ported into the generators. So that's how we do things. We prototype them in this project, and then we say, okay, this is good, now it's vetted. Now make a template out of that for both the server and the client. And then we put that in the generator, and then it becomes a command. That's the pattern we're showing. And so here are all the possible features that you can see demonstrated. And if we are to run that app, here's the demo app. And what was mentioned before about the relationships is visible here. If we go to users, no, there are no users. Forgetting my own app. Users create new? No.
The sales still have a socket?
Yeah, it does. So that's an alternative. Sales comes with two adapters, a REST adapter and a socket adapter. So it's up to you which one you want to use. By default, Ember picks up the REST adapter, but it's not too hard to enable the socket. Yeah, so it clicks on the sales side, it clicks. On Ember side, I'm not too sure what you would use to make the socket connect. Does anybody know of a good socket adapter for Ember? Yes, not. What did we use, Jake? Did you write a custom?
Yeah.
So I guess at Classmates, we wrote a custom adapter to click into Ember and talk to the socket in the back. Totally. Oh, not or something. Oh, there we go. Okay. Right, so my issue was I wasn't really logged in. But anyway, this thing, is a demonstration, and it has a bunch of the features which we talked about, like relationships and whatnot. And it's actually pretty easy to do that. You don't have to worry about it too much in this stack. So if you see here, I'm pulling up user data. And as a response, I'm getting that user's everything pretty much. So it's side-loaded by default, which is what Ember does by default. But our generators may support now or in the near future nesting. And Ember data already does support nesting. And I've tried that out, and it actually works right now. So you see, this user has a lot of stuff in the database, and it all came through. He has photos, albums, statuses. It has all his stuff, posts, and it also is an owner of a bunch of vendors. So all that got delivered to us simply by requesting the user object. And the relationships are mapped out, and I can show you what that looks like. Oh, that's another app now. Let's see. So we have relationships, models. So here are those relationships on the sales side. You're basically, in a very similar fashion to Ember, you are defining your relationships right here. And you're saying all these are basically owned by the user. And the field which you're looking for as a connection is defined right here. And it's just like Ember data that then serves as a layer in memory which maps everything in the server. And then it will figure it out in the database on its own. So it's kind of a mirror. You have your database that is mirrored by the sales ORM, and then it gets to the browser and is mirrored there. And everything is mapped by ID. All the relationships are maintained and preserved. All you got to do is do your data modeling, and that's pretty much it. It will from then on work, at least in my experience with Mongo. I don't know exactly what happens with Postgres, but that's the part I've been hearing complaints about, where they try to write this kind of object schema inside of sales, and then the schema does not get generated properly inside of Postgres SQL. And in Mongo, that's not an issue because Mongo has no schema. And it is quite simple to do that, actually. So we have relationships, and we can also demonstrate that by looking at the vendors. And you can see the vendors belong to a user. And to do that, all that I did to be able to get that listing, I did through this request, which, if you see here, well, actually, it's a bit more complicated, but I said basically get me the vendors, and the user ID is that. And then sales figured it out. And if you guys want to see that controller, you wonder what's in the controller, right? Here's what's in the controller. It's absolutely nothing. So thanks to the ORM and to Ember, I'm able to, with no lines at all of controller code, I'm able to do relationships, I'm able to do a whole lot. I think I do sorting somewhere too. I just need to remember where. Somewhere where I haven't deleted my code, hopefully. Posts. And then, so here are two posts, and if you look at that request, I guess this is not Not sorting. Somewhere I have sorting. Let's see. Client. Posts. So I'm trying to find the example that sorts status. There. Let's I have this kind of a checking that I'm working on, but it might be actually broken right now. Yeah, there's a bug in this one, sorry. So, but I can copy this. So if you see here, when we're passing the, when we look for an object in the server, we look for a status, we can pass the sort object, and then we say what field we want to sort by and what is the order. And if I'm to add this to the posts, let's see where the posts are here. So my index of posts is coming out of this route, and I can then add this to that route. Now if I go back, everything should reload automatically, I think. So if I go back to the posts, now this request actually is passing a sort object, and the response is ordered. And if I don't remember what order I did it, actually I'm pretty sure new was second. And if I am now to go on the back and switch that around, you will see it switched. So again, with no server code, I'm able to sort. I have nothing in the sort controller or the status controller either. This one is also completely empty, which is kind of crazy. Everything is taken care of it, it doesn't matter. So here's one last thing I'm going to show. All this magic pretty much is happening because everything is abstracted to the blueprint and it's inherited automatically, right? But what happens if you want more than that? And what happens if you can do a one-off by overriding the CRUD methods? So if I come here and I say, okay, I don't want the one coming out of the box, I want another find, which is another function and so on. That will be a one-off override of the blueprint. But how do I make it so that I add a new functionality to the blueprint? So I have an example like that, and here's the vendors again. So hopefully this works. There we go. So if you see here, it just pulled the location we are at, which is right here, and then it was able to pin two vendors in the system, which are these two. One of them is Seattle Center, one is the Shanty Cafe, right? And those are because they're close. So if you look at that Ember route, let's see, routes, no, pods. This is really small and it's killing me, but it's okay. So here's the route, and if you see what's happening here, I am passing, instead of the sort object I passed earlier, I'm passing one called near. And then near contains a field name and the coordinates and a max distance. So if I was to say, 3,000 right here, let's see what happens. And now I have 3 vendors. And the third one that was farther is now down there. So this was a GeoQuery, and if you look at the vendor controller on the server, it's absolutely empty as well. So we're doing automatic GeoQueries at this point, which I think is pretty amazing. So if we examine what came back, I do have a location right here, and that is GeoJSON format. It has to be. For the GeoQuery to work, it has to be in this format. So it has to have a type and coordinates. to be able to do this. And besides Mir, you have around 7 or 8 more of those geoqueries in Mongo. So you are able to automatically through the database get a computation that way, and you can just pass it through the server and send it right to your client. You just have to follow, again, GeoJSON is a convention, just like everything else in this demo. You follow that convention, you can automate it to the point where you get free geoqueries like this. It's that simple. And I think, unless there are questions, that's all I have for right now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Part question, part feedback. So you're talking about how Ember, and it's really cool stuff. There's a lot of great stuff that you can do by default. And as you said, Ember is kind of prides itself on having reasonable defaults.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious why the default for this stuff would have GET requests that create data.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, I mean, that's a security issue. You don't want to have GET requests that modify data.
GET requests? Or
GET.
Oh, right, okay, got it now. Why? Because it's up to you to police that. You can turn it off, and you better.
Okay, well, why is the policy such that it's not secure by default?
Oh, because it comes out of a prototype made for rapid development, not for production.
Yeah, so sales gives you like way extra routes just to make it easy to create data, period.
Okay.
And then you make the policies and you actually have your application.
Interesting. I mean, I find a lot of, I come from the Django world where, that they turn on, CSRF verification, and it's kind of a pain to turn it off. So it's secured by default. And, Ember CLI includes content security policy or, by default for a reason. So it's one of those things where it makes the developer have to think about creating a secure app where you should, security is something that you should really have to think too hard about, because if you don't think too hard about it, you're not going to think about it at all.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
But they would say accept pull requests along those lines, or is it designed to keep things open?
Oh, we definitely take pull request suggestions. Anybody can come to the chat, talk to us.
Okay.
Yeah, so any suggestion is very welcome.
Do you think that's a road that Sane should move, is to tighten things up, to be more?
So the project is very new, it's completely rough. Everything I showed you, we finished coding yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's kind of amazing it actually works. So the path forward is, many iterations towards best practice, We want to make it so that it's, yes, easy to use, but able to be deployed to production.
Yeah.
That is the goal. Fully, we're not there yet. I mean, that's a hard task to do. And we will get there, though. We have good team.
Clarify the difference between Sane and sales.
Also, sales is the framework for the server which does the API. That was done a year or two ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago even. So it's actually the most popular when it comes to stars on GitHub, which is the official way of measuring popularity. So it is the one for Node, which is really popular, and it's older. Sane is basically the stack in the CLI which puts Ember and Sales together. And that's why it's called Sane, Sales and Ember. That's an acronym. But it's also because it uses convention on both ends, so you don't have to lose your mind trying to figure it all out by yourself. You have a pattern that you're being shown, and for the repetitive tasks, you can generate. And that way you're not always doing chores, and you're not in the dark.
Is it true that part of the design is like, if there's something you haven't seen before, or something you say like, you want something to be secure, you could go make your own improvement, like say clone,
Right.
do something, and you wanted to make one that was
Right. So
security first.
right. Sales is completely open to everything can be overridden. So, and they split the entire framework is now exposed through hooks. So the life cycle of everything you can hook into and alter any behavior you want. You can just override anything you want, pretty much. So, of course, if you're doing something sensitive, you want it to be really robust and meticulously, control what happens. Of course, go and override and make your own. And whichever piece of the framework you want to do that with, you can. You know, some made it harder than others, but that's at least the idea that the sales developer is going towards. And yeah, so sales was done by totally independent developers a while ago. Sane was done very recently by the guy from London, Marcus. And this is the latest iteration. That's where it is. Question?
Do you find like query parameter to like, let's say you want to do an index to like get to these stuff vendors or whatever? Would you find like the Ember query bounds to MongoDB filters allowing you to like get a restricted list of vendors?
So you're asking when the security would kick in that case, or?
Not necessarily, but it's like, you know, if you want to get a list of vendors, you want to get maybe just like, let's say pagination, right? So you want to get the first 20 vendors ordered by blah, where a name contains food. So that in Ember you can use Ember query farms to find all that from on the Ember side. When you go on the server, I use Express. I have to do that manually pretty much. That I get that such query farms in MySQL. In MySQL query it has to be that. So is that currently already wired up?
Yeah, it's wired up. You can do pagination, so you can do limits and offsets out of the box. Just like I passed it the sort object, you can pass the limit and a skip object or a parameter, and that will take effect. And that's the same way I extended the geo as well. I just made myself a new one in the blueprint, which then I call near, and if it detects that, then it also adds that to the criteria for the query. And at that point, yeah, you can do pagination, you can do sorting, and you can do geo without writing any server code.
Okay, let's thank you. We'll often go for a drink. It's up to the drinks here, obviously too. But if we pack up, some of us will go get a beer off the street. But you're more than welcome to hang out for a little while.